Chapter 16. Nancy's Strategy. The children in the car sat in silence, stunned by the sudden appearance of the policeman. Bess and George gasped at the idea he evidently was accusing Nancy of breaking the law. "I think I know the traffic laws," she replied. "Is something the matter? Surely I wasn't speeding." "No, you weren't, but you are still breaking the law. Your car is overcrowded." He looked inside. "My word, how many children are in here?" Bess answered, "There are 9. "And 3 adults," the policeman said. "By my arithmetic, that adds up to 12 persons. The most your car can hold is 6. Nancy felt very uncomfortable. Looking at the officer, she smiled and said, "I wasn't going far. These children are from the Tabler place. I'm taking them only to the Thurstons to see the birds and animals. Please let me go the rest of the way. I'll make sure 2 cars take the children back." Silence followed. Finally, one of the boys said, "Oh, please, Mr. Policeman, we want to see the animals and everything." A little girl piped up, "And she's a very nice lady to bring us." The officer smiled. "Okay, it's obvious you're doing a good deed and you're not far from the Thurston place. But from now on, remember, no more than 6 people in this car." Nancy thanked him and drove on. The children cheered and clapped. A little girl in the back seat leaned forward and put her hands on Nancy's shoulders. "I was afraid he was going to put you in jail. We wouldn't want that to happen." Nancy, Bess, and George were touched by the children's solicitude. Despite their pranks and annoyance to their grandmother, they were lovable, and with more training, they could learn to act courteously to strangers. Nancy was startled a moment later when one of the older girls asked Nancy, "Did that policeman try to jinx you?" In amazement, Nancy asked her, "What do you know about jinxes?" "Oh," said the child, whose name was Sue. "A man comes to Graham's house sometimes. He told us children if we didn't do as he says, he'd put a jinx on us." Nancy frowned. "You know he can't do that. It's a lot of nonsense." "Is it?" Sue asked. "The man said he could have us turned into animals." "That's right," a boy spoke up. "The Jinx man said he could bring us all kinds of bad luck." Nancy and her friends made no comment. They were convinced that the man had said this to frighten the children. But why? Finally, Nancy had an idea and asked, "What did this person want you to do?" Sue replied promptly, "He wants us to tell Graham and Gramp that their house and the whole place has spooks and they should sell it." "Spooks?" George repeated. "There are no such things." "Oh, yes, there are," Sue insisted. "Janie and I saw one from our bedroom window." The little girl named Janie added, "The spook was all white and leaped around the garden. Boy, could he jump high. Once he flew right across the big flower bed." The same thought rushed into the minds of Nancy, Bess, and George. The spook might be the specter who had swooped across the Thurstons' living room. Nancy asked the children, "What was his name? I don't mean the spook, but the other man who told you about these things." "He was Mr. Mervman," Sue answered. "Do you mean Merv Marvel?" Nancy suggested. The children shook their heads, and Janie said, "No, Mervman." Nancy and her friends were sure he was the ballet dancer who had been dismissed from the Van Camp troupe. A few minutes later, the car pulled into the Thurston farm. As the visitors piled out, Oscar came toward the group. Nancy explained why she had brought the children and introduced them. "I told them of my idea for the housing development, with your farm being kept as an aviary and zoo." Oscar winked at her and then said, "Come with me, children. I'll show you the birds first." Nancy herself was intrigued by the talk which followed. As they walked past the cages of rare parrots with green, blue, and red feathers, Oscar said, "Birds have an interest in bone structure. Their bodies are lightweight for flying because the bones are hollow, and those in the wings have air sacs. Have you ever watched a bird take a running start and then lift into the air just like an airplane? The children shook their heads no. One boy named Jimmy asked, "What's that funny-looking bird?" He pointed. "That's an Atlantic puffin," the bird owner told him. He said that the bird, which had a very puffy chest and a hooked blue and red bill, was not exactly cuddly. "Oh, I see a beautiful bird," Janie cried out, pointing to a sleek one with a yellow stomach. The rest of its body was mostly covered with lustrous green feathers. "That's an emerald cuckoo from Africa," Oscar told her. "Let's see if we can make him sing." Oscar made a sound like cuckoo, cuckoo. The bird lifted its head, looked all around, and then, to the children's delight, answered, "Cuckoo, cuckoo." Jimmy was so intrigued he had put his face close to the cage. He remarked, "This is a fun place. I wish I could go in there." Oscar said this would not be wise. Strangers frighten the birds. Presently they came to a cage of various breeds of hummingbirds. Many of the dainty little creatures were fluttering in mid-air, sipping something from the flowers of an artificial tree. Oscar explained that he filled the cups of the flowers each day with nectar. "These tiny birds are amazing," he said. "They need a terrific amount of energy to make their wings work that fast." In proportion to its size, a bird consumes a great deal more food than a man. For instance, a pigeon eats 1/20th of its own weight daily. To equal this appetite, a man would have to consume 9 pounds a day, 3 times his average intake. Bess remarked, "Then the old saying that a person eats like a bird isn't true." "That's correct," said Oscar. When the tour of the aviary was finished, Rausch met the visitors and led them to another part of the farm. There, behind a row of tall poplar trees, was the small zoo he managed. The children laughed gleefully over the bears, whom they were allowed to feed. Next they went to see the deer, a pair of sleepy lions, and a giraffe whose neck was so long his head stuck out over the top of his pen. "Couldn't he get away?" Janie asked. Rausch said, "Not a chance. He'd have to get a running start to leap out, and the pen is too small for that." After the visitors had seen all the animals, Oscar invited his guests to the house for ice cream and cookies. Bess and George offered to help him serve, while Nancy talked with the children. She began by asking, "Would you like to see this place destroyed?" "No!" They all shouted loudly. She told them that the man who called himself Mr. Mervman wanted to do this. "How awful!" Janie exclaimed. Nancy said she agreed and was working hard to keep the town council from voting in favor of such a thing. "The builders want to put the apartment houses right here and destroy the Thurston farm. Will you do me a favor?" she went on. When they all said yes, she added, "Tell your Gram and Gramps how much you love this place and you want it to stay. Maybe you could write a letter to the newspaper and all of you sign it." "We'll do it!" Janie cried out. Just then, Oscar Thurston came out of the kitchen with a tray of ice cream on sticks. Bess followed with a heaping plate of cookies. After a while, Nancy noticed that one ice cream pop was still on the tray. "Who doesn't like ice cream?" she asked the children. No one answered. She began to count and presently said, "Jimmy is missing." At that moment, they all heard a scream from the section where the birds were kept. Nancy ran outside and moments later was horrified to find that Jimmy had entered a cage. A huge black raven, frightened and angry at the intrusion, was attacking him. Jimmy continued to scream as the bird's huge, cruel claws kept striking at him. Nancy did not wait. Grabbing up an empty feed sack from the ground, The young detective opened the door of the cage and rushed inside. End of chapter 16.